Throughout history, civilizations have risen to remarkable heights, only to fade gradually from prominence. The real causes of decline typically unfold over generations, rooted in how societies manage their fundamental resources. Consider the Maya civilization in Central America. Between roughly 250 and 900 C, Maya city-states developed sophisticated writing systems, advanced mathematics, and impressive architecture. Yet by the 10th century, many of these urban centers had been abandoned. Evidence indicates that environmental pressures played a significant role. The Maya agricultural system depended heavily on maize cultivation, which required clearing forest land. As populations grew, more land was converted to farmland. Archaeologists have found that soil erosion increased substantially during the civilization's peak period. This pattern created a feedback loop. As forests disappeared, the land's ability to retain water diminished. Agricultural yields declined precisely when populations were at their highest. Researchers examining lake sediments have identified multiple drought periods between 800 and 1000 C, each lasting years or even decades. The consequences extended beyond agriculture. Reduced crop yields meant less surplus to support craftspeople, administrators, and laborers. Trade networks weakened. Construction projects slowed or stopped entirely. Social structures that had maintained order for centuries came under strain. The Maya political system relied on elite families who claimed divine authority. Their legitimacy rested partly on ensuring prosperity and favorable conditions. As harvests failed repeatedly, this authority eroded. Inscriptions from the period become less frequent, suggesting that administrative systems were breaking down. The infrastructure that once connected cities began to deteriorate without the labor forces to maintain it. Rather than a sudden collapse, what occurred was a gradual dispersal. People migrated to areas with more reliable water sources, or where land was less degraded. The complex administrative structures that required large populations simply became unsustainable. Some cities were abandoned completely, while others shrank to fractions of their former size. On Easter Island, a similar pattern emerged. Polynesian settlers arrived around 1200 C and found an island covered with palm forests. These trees provided materials for building, tools, and the rollers needed to transport the famous stone statues. As the population grew, tree harvesting accelerated. Pollen analysis shows that by 1650, the forests had been almost entirely cleared. Without trees, islanders could no longer build ocean-going canoes, cutting them off from deeper water fishing resources. Soil erosion increased, reducing agricultural productivity. The population, which may have reached 10 or 11,000 at its peak, declined to perhaps 2 or 3,000 by the time European ships arrived. The statues themselves, while culturally significant, required substantial timber resources to move and position. The very practices that expressed the islanders' identity contributed to the depletion of resources they depended upon. This demonstrates how cultural priorities can sometimes conflict with long-term sustainability. The Norse settlements in Greenland offer another example. Vikings established communities there around 985 C, bringing farming practices adapted to Scandinavia. They raised cattle and sheep, hunted walrus for ivory, and maintained trade connections with Iceland and Norway. For roughly 4 centuries, these communities persisted. However, historians suggest the settlers never fully adapted their practices to Greenland's marginal environment. They continued to prioritize cattle farming, which required extensive pastureland and produced limited yields in the short growing season. Climate records indicate that temperatures dropped during the Little Ice Age, beginning around 1300. Growing seasons shortened further, and sea ice increased, making navigation and trade more difficult. Rather than shifting to fishing or adopting hunting methods better suited to the changing conditions, the Norse largely maintained their traditional practices. Archaeological evidence from the later period shows signs of malnutrition and decreased stature in the population. The settlements became increasingly isolated as trade with Europe diminished. By the mid-15th century, the colonies had been abandoned. These cases illustrate a common pattern. Civilizations develop practices that work well under specific conditions. As they grow successful, populations increase, and resource demands expand. The institutions that enabled initial success often prove difficult to change, even as circumstances evolve. Administrative complexity can itself become a burden. As societies grow, they develop more specialized roles and elaborate systems to coordinate activities. These structures require resources to maintain. When economic productivity declines, supporting them becomes increasingly difficult. Evidence from various civilizations shows that administrative centers are often abandoned earlier than smaller settlements. The process rarely happens quickly. Decline typically unfolds over multiple generations. One difficult harvest can be weathered, but the accumulation of pressures over lifetimes proves overwhelming. People make reasonable decisions given their immediate circumstances, yet the long-term trajectory continues downward. Modern archaeological techniques reveal these gradual transformations through pollen records, sediment cores, and isotope analysis of human remains. Together, these sources paint pictures of slow change rather than sudden catastrophe. Each piece of evidence adds detail to our understanding of how environmental and social factors interweave. Understanding these patterns matters because they reveal how civilizations function as interconnected systems. Resources, environment, population, institutions, and culture are linked. Changes in one area ripple through others. A society might compensate for declining agricultural yields by intensifying trade, but if environmental degradation is widespread, trade partners face similar challenges. The historical record shows that civilizations do not typically end in apocalyptic events. Instead, they transform. What ends is a particular way of organizing society that proved unsustainable under changing conditions. The knowledge and cultural achievements often persist, carried forward by successor societies, or preserved in different forms. The decline of civilizations emerges from slow accumulation of stresses rather than single catastrophic failures. Environmental degradation, resource depletion, and institutional rigidity combine over generations. What we observe is not weakness of particular peoples, but the inherent challenges of maintaining complex societies when conditions shift. These transformations remind us that sustainability requires constant adaptation. Societies that thrive do so by recognizing changing conditions and adjusting their practices accordingly, while those that cling rigidly to past methods risk gradual decline. The evidence points clearly to gradual transformation driven by accumulated pressures that eventually exceeded these societies' capacity to adapt.